there's a number of stories I often share privately with members, clients, and close personal friends. And often when this comes up, I think to myself, I should share them with you guys. And I haven't taken enough time to do that. So I'm just going to share a couple here with you that are meaningful. And these are the kinds of, they're like stories that stay with you. They tend to have an effect on how you think and how you react, and they reveal an interesting dynamic of how things work. So I'll jump into that in a sec. I wanted to say thank you. The last couple of videos, a significant number of you asked. You sent me private emails asking to be on the private conversations list. So I did get your emails, and if you haven't heard back from me, because I've responded to everyone, then just message me again, because for some reason maybe it didn't get through. But thanks. I will give you a heads up. I know the time is short, so I will try to get this done and off to you as soon as I can. All right, so I'm just going to share a couple of quick stories with you. I'm going to discuss, before I jump into some of the stories, there's a concept I've mentioned before. You've probably heard it in this video. We talked about a key SOS principle, which is just the parallax view. And we described what is the parallax view. I want you to think about it in another way as well. Also, the composite view. So if you take a look at a situation and you look at it from many angles or many layers, and then you see where things intersect, because chances are where things intersect, there's a great significance related to the event or circumstance. So how would that play out? Okay, so one of the problems, if we just use, say, only astrology to look at something, there's good things with this, and there's potential challenges. And some of those challenges come in through, okay, so we're looking at a data set, a bunch of elements, and we're trying to interpret what they mean. So one of the challenges is that in astrology, you have multiple schools. You have different kinds of astrology, and sometimes their interpretations overlap and sometimes they diverge. So how do you tell what you're looking at, if you don't know which system to use? So one of the things that I've found works really well is I don't like to envision myself as the kind of person that cherry picks. In other words, you never want to get caught up in superficial grazing of information and then just picking things that make you feel good or that fit whatever your subjective worldview is only. But then there's another kind of cherry picking where you go into a system, you find the best nuggets, you extract them, and then you keep going. So by the end, you have some phenomenal mechanisms and pieces of information that you've woven together from systems, and you watch how they work together. And then from that standpoint, you usually get a much better idea as to what the pulse of a situation is. But the composite view comes in where, okay, so we might be using different elements and instruments and mechanisms from different kinds of astrology, but that still isn't really enough. I mean, what you have to do is you have to also take a look at what's happening dynamically in the real world, and then parallel the information. And so there's a number of things that you want to look at coincidentally with an astrological view, because this gives you a much clearer idea, for one thing, as to how even the astrological energy is likely to manifest. In other words, what kind of event can we really, anticipate with enough accuracy so that the information has utility, actually has usefulness and value. Okay, so I'm going to just start off with one story. So one of the stories is, I read this once many years ago, and I don't remember where I read it, and I haven't been able to find it since, but it always stuck with me. And it was a story that went something like this. ancient China, Confucius has his own little school, and he takes work assignments, from the emperor. And so what happens is, on a regular basis, Confucius sends his pupils to different regions in China, and their instruction is basically go to the center of the village, go to the center of the town, sit all day, get there early, stay late, and just sit, close your eyes, and listen. Just listen to the ambient sounds of the downtown part of the village, and let the sounds make an overall impression on you. Try to get a sense of intuition as to what's happening generally in the community for the people on that day. Then come back and report to me, and then we'll interpret that and try to give meaningful information to the emperor. So what would happen is they'd get there, they'd sit there all day, and some pupils on some days in some places would hear babies laughing, mothers having happy conversations with their inner circle. There would be men discussing trade. There would be sort of like a sense of peace and contentment. Different kinds of information that just seemed to indicate an upbeat mood. So they'd come back, they'd report that, Confucius would interpret it and would send a report off to the emperor, and they would have a sense of foreknowledge as to what they could expect in that region over a period of time. Conversely, if they went there and they heard babies crying, mothers arguing, men feeling angry towards each other, if there were arguments, a sense of lack, a sense of want, then they would come back and they would interpret it, and they would be able to, manage crop crises, manage, the incursion of bandits or hostile tribes, manage rebellion. And so for them, it was a very practical sense of, knowledge. So why am I telling you this story? Well, understand that Confucius had a fairly specific set, or a very specific rule set. And we'll talk more about that. There's a lot of stuff in ancient China, related to math and astrology that had uncanny utility. You've probably heard of the I Ching. The I Ching is an interesting artifact of math for sure. So this has to do also with frequency. So information is carried individually and collectively by the tempo and the rhythm of the expression and the state of the people. Very important, both just for your day-to-day experience, because now you have a sense of, if you find yourself in an environment and setting where you're noticing, different kinds of collective trends, it's worth your time to maybe pay more attention to that. Anyway, that's it for now. We're going to go on to the next video segment shortly. Okay, so this is a video segment in follow-up to the previous. I just wanted to, we're going to be jumping into a bunch of things related to, the central issues that we've discussed in prior videos. So bear with me, we're going to get to that. I want to give you some encouragement. And, a lot of times we go through a challenge or stress, and depending on the nature of the stress, it may be degrees of ease to accept support. So, just as a simple example, let's say something bad happened to you. You've got a bunch of people that wish you well, they care about how you feel. And then there's a variety of responses from them. Even if a person means well, they may not know what to say or what to express to their, wounded friend. They may not have a frame of reference for it, or they may have a frame of reference for it and have a pretty good idea as to how you're feeling, but they kind of know that there really wasn't a lot anybody else could say to them that made them feel better. So in some cases, it's just time, right? So I want to express something to you that I think will encourage you And I believe there's power in this concept that's sufficient, should be sufficient for most, even if you're in a situation where you're feeling down and it's difficult to experience like a deep, sincere sense of relief. So this is the encouragement. Understand that there's a lot of nasty people that are intelligent and have a lot of resources, and they're corrupt. They have no conscience. And a lot of what's going on in the world right now is by design. So it's like a trap that they've set up, and they've been meticulous. They have a lot riding on it. If they don't succeed, some of them will be in pretty hot water. So they're strongly motivated to succeed because they view it as their very survival being at stake. And for a lot of them, that's likely true. And so from what we're seeing, what I should say is from what I'm seeing and a number of other people is that a faction of them will win for a time, or at least it will seem like they do. And it'll go rough for a lot of decent, good people. They don't win forever, and but the trick is you want to be able to hang on until you can get through it. Some people will be able to get through it better than others. But even with all their intelligence, even with all their resources, in the backs of their minds, where arrogance hasn't blotted this out, there's often an unconscious kind of seeping into the rest of their conscious mind that makes them panic. There's different things that many of them are afraid of. Despite how clever and intelligent and well-resourced they are, there's always the concern, there's always the worry that they've overlooked something. Some of you might be sci-fi fans. There's a really interesting sci-fi fiction series, and it's about this big empire that exists in the future, and it goes across the solar system. It's been around for a long time, very strong, very capable, and then some anomaly happens. And this anomaly is something that they didn't account for. They had all kinds of brilliant models, like statistical models. And then something called a mule arrives, and it's something that their system didn't account for. And so for you, although things seem dire, and on the fundamental plane of reality that most people have to exist on, that's essentially the case. There are anomalies that exist in that plane of reality. They're like doorways. And one of the things my mentor told me, he said, the special gift is only meant for the special one. And so we see this metaphor in things like stories like, King Arthur and Excalibur. Only one person could draw the sword. So what has to happen then is there has to be a rebirth and renaissance in your soul. And you need to be able to basically tune in. And I'm not talking woo-woo metaphysical hogwash. I'm talking about something that's actually real. One of the problems that happens is that there's some good ideas floating around in technology, in things like philosophy, but there's different tactics that sinister people use to keep that kind of information from the common person. And one of the things that they do is they either just censor it or they get rid of the information entirely. That's pretty handy. And that's been happening a lot. Or they introduce so much noise into the system that it becomes close to impossible to actually find something legit. And so one of the ways that works is, burning bright, high idea that might empower many. The other side, it becomes aware of it. They try to obfuscate or blur it. So they begin to create many replicas that look and sound and, have a feel for, the real thing. And then they just pump it out there. And the problem with those avenues is that they don't lead anywhere, and they know that. It's just meant as a distraction. Okay, so what happens is this. I'm going to just do a brief summary. I will try to talk about more of the detail further. But first of all, in order for a lot of you to be okay and make it, you have to really think outside the box. And that's a term that's been pretty much beaten to death. It's like one of these beaten to death phrases like law of attraction. People parroting terms that they don't really understand, and and even if they did understand it, it hasn't been described well when it was first presented. Anyway, so you have to think outside the box in the sense of you have to look at your environments, the one that you're in, the one that you believe that you're in, and you have to open your mind and allow for other possibilities. In other words, other layers or elements that heretofore you may not have even been able to perceive. Options. One of the things, the way that you control people is you limit their options. They only have so many choices, or at least they only perceive so many choices. And so what you have to do is you have to go beyond that. And that means, feeding your creativity, using your imagination, maybe opening up to things that are positive, powerful, and meaningful that you've ignored or discounted or just haven't even been aware of yet. One of the things I can tell you, I was a big skeptic of astrology, and in a number of ways I still am, even though I use it. I had to get to the point. I was that annoying kid that always asked why in school, and that just galled the teachers. I had to understand the why of the important parts of that model of astrology before, I could suspend my disbelief in it. And so once I had accomplished that, then I was able to make more practical use of it. And I find for myself, had I known a lot of the stuff that I know now, a decade, 2 decades ago, or longer ago, I would have saved so much time and grief. And the reason is that there's nodes, there's points across time and space where certain kinds of activity or potential probabilities are more fluid. They're more accessible. Other times when you go across the timeline, things are more fixed and static. Meaning basically there's just a kind of quality to the pressure of gravity on people's minds and bodies that makes it harder for them to move forward in a certain direction. I used to have a buddy that worked with me in IT, and he was Brahmin. And he was from India, very nice guy, and very well spoken. And we worked together for quite some time. And I'm not a Hindu. I don't believe in Hinduism. I see that there's a lot of interesting and beneficial ideas in it. I'm fascinated by the sciences, like in the Vedas, etc. But whenever he would share something, I'd listen. I'd pay attention to what he was saying. And he told me this interesting story about how basically in reality, in their system, they felt that there were many gods that kind of resided at a certain nexus of action and non-action. So you'd have like a web work, like a spider's web, and wherever the strands in the web connected, they'd have an entity or a force that would scrutinize the passage of any travelers across their domain, and they would decide whether it was a yes or no you could go. And he said that this is why a lot of times people that are Hindus feel that they have to wait for an auspicious time, or they have to propitiate, the entity to get their favor. Otherwise, they just won't be able to make progress. So while I don't believe in that particular spiritual ideology. I think that there is a practical utility there in the sense that here we are, we're in time space, and there are segments of time that have different qualities to it. So for me, basically, if I wanted to go and experience or do something, I'd graph it out. I'd wait till the sweet spot occurred, and I would find that, sure enough, far more than average, I'd get better traction. Same thing with hazard. If there was hazard coming up and I could see it, I would try to prepare in advance and then minimize and withdraw and try to warn people around me. The problem with that approach, of course, is that people that aren't aware, or they're stuck, fixedly in their ego, they often don't want to hear that kind of information because it goes counter to their appetites or their impulses or how they want to indulge themselves. So even if you can tell someone that there's a car that's about to hit them, and there's enough time for you to tell them, and they might be warned and they might escape, a lot of times people are just pig-headed and stubborn, arrogant, ignorant, selfish, and they don't want to hear what you have to say, or they misperceive it. They may be aware that you're trying to help. They may think that there might be something to what you're saying, but it doesn't fit their agenda. And they might have a fine agenda. They might be a decent person, and they're like, well, thanks for that information, but gee, I've already made these plans. I got to do X, so I can't really take advantage. And you can't really do much. All you can do is share the information in those times. So, okay. So the thing that you do is that you start to, as much as you can, whatever time and energy that you have, you start to seek out options that are outside the framework where the stress resides. So if you're in a framework where parts of it are crumbling and there's danger of it falling on you or danger of it constricting you, then what you have to do is you have to find some way to get outside the framework and then discover what that is, discover what that means. And it isn't just only an external search. It's going to be an internal search too. That means that you have to learn things that you may not know a lot about, and you might have to do it fast. It probably means restructuring your daily routine for one. And it also means, probably going through, if you're going to live in a different reality, like an actual real different reality or a different kind of circumstance or environment, part of what has to happen is you've got to be in the right state, to access, get there, and then remain there. We've used the analogy of if you're going to be tuning a radio station in on your radio, you want to make sure that you're accessing that signal and getting rid of the noise, but the radio you're using needs to be in a certain shape. Like you might have some radios that they can only pick a signal up from a certain distance. And chances are, for some of you, you might have to reach a signal that's farther away. So begin to explore what needs to happen. Begin to explore what needs to happen inside of you. One of the ways that you do that is you reflect on what part of your being, your emotional life, like your sense of self, your sense of identity, your sense of relation to others, what parts have been, sequestered? What parts have been shut away or repressed, or damaged, or maybe something that really, really mattered to you that you believed in, you thought was real. Something happened in your life, and now you had a different perception. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing. Like a dog bites you, and now you think from that point forward that all dogs will bite you. So the issue is what you're associating to the original event, and then you're letting it basically disable your well-being you might meet a dog that's really nice. You know, it could become one of your best friends. So it's these kinds of things. They have to be identified and then shaken out. Because the more that you do that, then as and when these options come, you'll be able to sustain. All right, so I'm going to be going on to the next segment. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit now just about that private conversation bit that I promised I would try to get to for you guys in a timely manner. So in the comments section of this video below, when it's up on YouTube, this is streaming live on one of my social media sites right now. But when you see this in YouTube, if you go to the comments section, there will be a link. And for the private conversation details, you can purchase that. And then a private link will be sent to you. It's not meant for public distribution. And then I'll make sure you have access to that. What will we cover? Okay, so in a previous video, we were talking about how certain points in time and space are like nodes of activity. So at certain points in time and space, things may potentially go, better for you versus not. And that's not to say that free will doesn't play a part. There's some interesting quotes where it's like, man proposes, God disposes. And it says, the stars compel, but they do not impel. And, we always have, although we have these forces that are at play in our physical reality, there are things that can rise above that or are outside their influence. It's just we take a look at that model, like we would, if we were a farmer and we wanted to plant crops at a fortuitous time. You don't want to plant crops in late fall. It's just that simple, right? So there's a handful of dates in October. What I'll do is I will try to get busy this weekend and then just get the bulk of this content done. And then I'll tell you what the dates are. I'll describe what their qualities are and try to give an outline as to the kinds of things you should be focusing on, what you want to avoid, what you want to be aware of. But basically, it's just like they're forks in the road, basically. And, how you manage those times are likely going to have long-lasting consequences, for better or for worse. So one of those dates is it's a trouble spot, towards the third week of the month. And it's a heavy one. You don't want to get caught in that. So we'll basically talk about how do you identify, how it's manifesting, what steps can you take to, circumvent it and make sure that you're on the right path. And then towards the end of the month, we mentioned before that there's a couple of dates where it's like you're getting ready to launch your ship. I've used that metaphor a lot the last while, but it's kind of like a green light. It's a go time. And you want to make sure that if you're able to, you take advantage of that time and try to follow the general trajectory that I'm going to outline. So what I'll do is I'll share information and ideas that I've received from my mentor, and also a number of other sources, and just from the model that I'm looking at. Another thing I'm going to do in that video is I'm going to share some sources, some references. Some of them probably, I'm guessing some of you have heard of, you're probably aware of. My guess is probably a lot of you haven't heard of or made these available to yourself. But what they are basically is they're just, it's a collection of online links, like, information sources covering different topics. And then also there's a selection of YouTubers that I follow. And the reason for this reference information is this gives you a composite view or a parallax view, similar to what we were talking about previously. So basically what I'll be doing is saying, like, here's the number of people I follow. This is the subject that they have expertise in. Here's why you should be paying attention to it. And then the idea is, as you are able to access and review these different sources of information, it should aid you in your decision-making process. Having a better overall understanding of what's going on collectively in different areas. It just lets you plan better. It lets you understand and orient better. And then what's the other thing? I'll also take you through a tour of some of the tools that I use for my clients and myself. My guess is a small number of you may be somewhat familiar with some of them. But what it will do is it will just kind of give you a sense as to, how do we track certain things in time and space? How do we represent that information? And then how do we take advantage of it? So if I have the time, I don't know if I will, I'm hoping that I do, I'll try to include that in there as well. It'll be like a list. So when you get access to the private conversation video, in the comments section will be just basically a series of links and a description as, to who are they, what are they about, and then, I'll give direction as to, how I use this for myself and how I use it for clients. And then I'll cover subjects like, what's going on with the economy. Usually what I look for are independent thinkers that have a good background and they don't have necessarily any kind of particular agenda. So usually their commentary is a bit more objective. The trick is to try to, and this is something that many of you are probably already doing, but you want to try to have a collection of these kinds of expert resources so you can kind of cross-compare. So if a tremor happens in one area, you see how it might play out in another. And that can actually happen not just figuratively, but literally. Like having an idea, and it might sound a little bit out there, but having an idea as to what the trends are and the geosciences, what's happening with earthquakes globally, what kind of periodicity and clustering are we seeing happening? And then is there any kind of direct or indirect effect on, some other area that's of interest to us? Here's a simple example of that. So one of the tools I'll take you on a tour through, or one of the tool sets that I'll take you on a tour through is some of the astrocartography mapping tools that are static and also dynamic. And we'll be taking a look at, how do energy lines, affect geographic regions in certain ways. So China has been having some pretty intense things going on dynamically in their astrocartography chart. So to be able to pull that up and visually examine it and actually see what the current dynamic state of a region is, pretty helpful. But when we compare what's happening with astrology to what's actually happening in China, we know that for the last while they've been having a serious crisis with the Three Gorges Dam. And so the dam has been pretty much at capacity. It's been flooding, it's been cracking, its foundation has moved. They've evacuated an enormous amount of people downstream. They've had to release water and they've literally had to flood places, which has caused all kinds of devastation. But the real scary part is that if the dam breaks, or if there's any kind of significant loss of control there, you've got something like over 50 nuclear reactors that are distributed along the river there. And it's one of the biggest waterways in the country. And you've got an enormous industrial infrastructure and huge populated area. It basically would be wiped out. So if that dam goes and it's bad, it would gut China. So you might think to yourself that may or may not affect you. But the reality is it'll affect most people because the stress from that would cause an enormous economic impact globally. And so, what do we do with this kind of information? Well, we become aware, like we're using a lot of different views of events that are happening in time space and trying to get a sense as to how something might affect us personally and what we might be able to do personally about it. Or at least have a sense of what's to come. So these are the kinds of things that I'll cover in the private conversation. It'll be like a webinar. My hope is I'll step through it, within 30 minutes. It might be a little bit more, it might be a little bit less. And specifically we'll cover those dates that are coming up this month. Basically what you set in place for October, what you can accomplish, the kind of state that you can get in is probably going to have long-term consequences. So the hope is that the nature of this information will let you keep from getting sucked into any kind of drama, or you don't want to take a wrong turn. You don't want to take a wrong turn and end up on the wrong road. So the hope is there that we'll be able to paint you enough of a picture in detail about the dates, and what you can do about it, and that'll be from a collective perspective. That won't. If I were to try to give you like a personalized, path through an understanding that took into account the kinds of specific trends that you might be coming up for, that's a different thing. But you'll have at least an idea in advance of what's happening as trends for the collective, and then with that information you should try to take that into account, be aware of it, manage it the best that you can, take advantage of whatever opportunity windows are present. So when this goes live on our YouTube channel, like I say, this is streaming right now, just go to the comment section in the video below. A number of you sent me a personal email over the last week, just asking to be on the private list. So I've saved everybody's email. Thanks for the interest. But I think one of the things that we'll do here, just my time is, I just don't have a lot of time right now, just with the sheer workload. So if you want me to send you the private link, just access it. It'll be a nominal fee, like maybe $49 or something like that. So just click on that. If you're in a situation where, if you're financially stressed, when you can't afford the full fee, if you're a long-time member, just send me an email. I'd rather you have the information, access to the information, than not. Our goal is to try to help. And I know some people are going through a tough time right now. So if you really can't afford the full, price, which will be a small price, just send me an email. We'll figure something out. But generally, for most people, I think just to cover my time and effort, it'll be something around $49. So thanks for the continued interest. We're going to get through this, and we'll be in touch soon.